Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Many of us struggle with sales, whether it's due to a lack in confidence, comfort, or just not wanting to be salesy. We want to help our customers, and we know we can, but we complicate the process. This podcast is designed to help professionals like you improve its sales through process, practice, frameworks, and thinking differently about what you already know. I'm Mike Simmons. I am the Chief Revenue Officer at CyberSafe, and I am really excited to have Chip Huth on the podcast today. Chip is a division commander with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. He's a senior consultant with the Arbinger Institute, and he is a contributor to the Changing Discourse Podcast. Chip, it is awesome to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Mike. Thanks for inviting me on.
So we met through Tanner. Tanner's an awesome dude. Tanner's a connector of people, and you and Tanner, as I mentioned in the intro, you and Tanner co-host the Changing Discourse Podcast. Why did you create a podcast?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, first off, all the credit goes to Tanner for creating it. I had been invited to do podcasts in the past, but I just never felt like I had the time to commit to doing something like that. I mean, it's quite an undertaking, as you're well aware. And, the people that had pitched to me before, I just felt like I was mildly interested. It sounded like fun, but, again, it's never hooked me. The idea really never hooked me enough to commit the time to it. And Tanner, he invited me on his podcast, and twice we had a couple of great conversations, and he kind of laid the groundwork after the first one. He suggested, Chip, I think you might be the kind of guy that would be good at having a podcast. You should think about it. And I thought, okay, well, think about it. I thought about it for about 5 minutes. And the second episode him and I taped with his podcast, we stayed on afterwards talking for quite a while. And Tanner, he just, the way that he pitched it, the way that he threw it out there, and he made it all seem possible. And, his initial idea was, hey, look, I'll do all the behind the scenes work. All you got to do is show up. And I thought, man, that's kind of hard to turn down, right? And then it just kind of evolved from there. But I thought, maybe I've got some interesting experiences. I've been in leadership for quite a while. I'm interested in all kinds of topics. So I thought, man, yeah, the idea of doing the podcast sounded like something we might be able to pull off. So together, Tanner and I, we threw in together, and, the rest is history. We have 32 episodes behind us now. So we're rocking and rolling. Pretty
exciting stuff. It is another friend of ours, Jody, would say a number of these podcasts usually stop at about number 7. I don't know how real that is, but I know that Jody comes from Peoria, and he's usually shoots pretty straight. So I would expect that number 7 is the number. And if you can get past 7, then you're on the right side of the curve.
So I didn't know Jody was from Peoria. Interesting factoid. I was homeless in Peoria when I was 7 years old, 6 or 7. I can't remember. We moved around so much, but I actually spent time in Peoria, living on the street in a station wagon. And I want to say, I remember very little about Peoria, but I want to say we also did live in some tenements temporarily for a few months before we headed to the next state. But yeah, so Peoria, yeah, fond of that place.
What kind of station wagon?
It was one of the old family trucksters, as I recall. I just remember it had, like, in the back, you had the metal, like, floorboard. You could fold that down. Like, you had 2 seats in it. You could fold them up, and you have little seats in the back, and you could fold them down. And we slept back there, the 4 kids, at night when we lived in that thing. But yeah, Peoria, when you said Peoria, just wow, memories.
I remember we used to drive from New York to Michigan once in the summer and once in the winter. And we would drive in I don't even remember the make of it, but an old station wagon. And this is a bit different than living in a station wagon, other than when you're with a bunch of brothers and sisters on a car trip like that on the Ohio Turnpike. And it can get pretty boring. The thing I remember is we had seats that faced backward. So you're riding in a vehicle, looking backward at everything kind of coming your way and moving its way around you. But it was one of those, like, not lime green, more of like a seafoam green with paneling, almost like the one in National Lampoons, but not quite as sophisticated as the one that the Griswolds used to drive around in.
Yeah. Ours was probably kind of an older version of that. I'm not sure where my dad even got it. I doubt that it was actually ours. He probably just quote unquote borrowed it. But I do remember we played a game, and those seats you're talking about, when we drive down the highway, he'd give a piece of candy to the kid who could count the most police cars. So we were always on the lookout for police cars. We thought it was a game, right? Like, looking for police cars, but it turns out he had a reason to want to know where those things were at.
That is awesome. And it created an opportunity for you to pass the time by.
Yeah, we sure did. We became really good. To this day, I can recognize a police car from about 200 meters. So
do you give yourself a piece of candy?
I do not, actually. I try to stay away from it as much as I can. I see so many in my profession that I'd be putting on some extra pounds if I rewarded myself every time I came across a police car.
So let's talk about that 30 years of service. What has that been like?
Interesting. It's been a journey. I mean, I was pretty naive coming into the profession. Most of my thoughts about it, even though I had an uncle that inspired me very much to want to be a police officer. He was military veteran and a police officer. So I had a kind of a general idea what it was really about by seeing him when I was younger. But really, mostly, I learned about it from allegory and, watching movies, reading books. And so I was pretty naive coming into it. I thought, I just wanted to be on a SWAT team. That was my main goal. And, you come in and the first couple of years just fly by. I mean, you're learning, you're trying to, it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much to know. And, then kind of reality settles in and you realize that, man, you start asking some questions like, the way we're going about this, really the best way to do it, like, is there, it really hit me with the war on drugs. It really started to hit me, in my first 5 years, I would say, where, we just kept locking up all these people addicted to drugs. Just, it was like this 911 hamster wheel. We'd come and break up disturbances, lock these people up that were addicted, and they'd be back on the street in no time. And then we'd be dealing with them again. And they were still addicted, by the way. It didn't do anything to dissuade them from doing drugs. It turns out that's a deeper problem than my young self thought it was, right? I thought it was just a character issue. Like, well, man, you're just making bad choices. Make better choices, right? So, yeah, I mean, the first bit of time, you're naive. Then you kind of learn, you start adapting to the reality of things, and you realize that, man, we really have to partner with people. And I know that sounds trite these days, or, people are always talking about community policing and stuff. But at the end of the day, policing has to be something done for people, not to them. And once you start realizing that, you become a lot more humble because you understand this problem that you're trying to address, crime and disorder and all these other things that go along with, having a community. These are big systemic issues that, I don't have a cape and a pair of boots and flying around the city stopping all the crime. That just can't happen. So, there's a little bit of cynicism that sets in. And then if you can get past that, it's kind of like my career started over again, I would say, after I had probably, 12, 15 years on. It was just like a whole new career with a whole new opportunity, a whole new way of seeing things. So yeah, it's been a bit of a journey, but now, I mean, I'm at this point where I'm in senior leadership. So, nothing I do other than wear the uniform really resembles real police work anymore. It's mostly meetings and mentoring and coaching and, strategic planning. And there's just nothing super sexy about my job. They don't make movies about commanders on the police department. Usually the commander's the one that comes in yelling at you, right? Like they're always the roadblock. Like you think about
door, breaks a window.
Yeah.
Knocks over the coffee, does something.
That's the one. Yeah. So like, did you ever see, well, it's just a silly question, probably. I'm sure for the listeners, it's silly for me to even ask this question, but the Beverly Hills Cop, right?
Yeah.
So great cop movie. Eddie Murphy, it was filmed in Detroit, and the police captain, remember his captain? I can't remember his name, but remember the African-American gentleman, mustache, when he just gets in Eddie Murphy's butt. I think Paul Reiser tells him, like Eddie Murphy comes in off of that cigarette bust, and Paul Reiser says, "Hey, the captain's looking for you, man." And Eddie Murphy's trying to sneak out of there. Oh, Captain Todd, that was his name. Okay, so here's the true story. Captain Todd was an actual Detroit police detective.
No kidding.
He was a technical advisor on the movie, and when he kind of showed him kind of how to maybe chew this guy out, right? Which was totally counter to his personality. He was a really nice, soft-spoken guy, and he did so well they just hired him like for the job. So you won't see him in any other movies, right? You'll see him in Inspector Todd is in that, like Beverly Hills Cop. He's in like 1 and 2, I think. I don't know if he's in 3. But I learned that from a colleague that was on the Detroit PD, Christy. She told me, yeah, I don't know. He was a super nice guy, but in the movie, he's just like off the hook. But he's a real police commander. So people think about like police commanders. We're always the roadblocks, right? We're obstructionists. We're never facilitating things, but that's not really how it goes. Obviously, we're the ones that are trying to think long term and do some planning and think beyond the implications of just one arrest or, one mission. So
it's kind of like sales management or the commercial team inside an organization that you've got to go to when you want to get a contract done. They're not involved in the day-to-day conversations with the customer. They're not out there in the field. Maybe they did. Maybe they carried a bag at one point in time, or they actually spent some time selling or in that kind of a role. And then we go in and we have conversations with them, and we wonder are they actually part of the function that keeps the organization moving, or are they a function that prevents the organization from moving. And it's really easy for folks who are in the field, again, carrying a bag, so to speak, to lose sight of the bigger picture. You get so emotionally attached to your specific deal or to the thing that you're working on or whatever that thing is that you're engaged in, that you forget that, hey, there's a reason why you put these stopgaps and processes and things in place that can actually maybe even help uncover some challenges that you might have missed in the context of a deal, or maybe, I guess, in the context of a case or something like that. I'm reaching hard to try to connect the dots here, and I don't know if I'm doing a good job.
No, I think you're doing a great job. Again, you have to have people at the strategic level of any enterprise looking out for, how do we keep everybody connected around a core mission? We're all trying to accomplish some objective, but we're approaching it from different perspectives and different responsibilities within the organization. And you have to have somebody tying it all in and then thinking about the downrange implications of, how does our work impact our strategic partners, right? Somebody's got to be thinking like that, so that's true with every organization. I worked with an organization, a major commercial real estate company, and they were having a bit of a challenge. We were doing some consulting with this company through Arbinger. They were having a bit of a challenge because you had the salespeople on one side who were the commercial real estate folks that are making, millions selling these properties. And on the other side, you had the salaried employees that worked in the accounting phase, right? So their job, this particular company was large enough that they actually loaned money to clients. So I'm going to buy this building and I don't have enough capital. I can, guess what? We're not going to sell it to you. We'll loan you the money to help you finance the sale. Well, of course, the accounting people, they're getting paid straight salary, and their job is to be responsible enough not to lend money to people who are high risk. And the salesperson's job is to get the sale. So you can see right away there are cross purposes within the same organization. And you can imagine some of the potential collusion there, right? You got these straight salary folks who are making what they're making, and you got these salespeople who are all practically millionaires, and they're pushing to get their clients approved for loans. And these folks are supposed to be good stewards of the company's money and not just handing out loans left and right. I mean, I see you smiling because I know that from your expertise. That's your expertise. That's your area, right? So there's so many commonalities there. I mean, if you think about it in police work, right? You've got maybe the narcotics advice unit whose objective is to, do this, maybe they're going to take on this mission in this neighborhood where they're going to target a specific house or a specific gang. And you got the patrol division whose mission is to establish a relationship with the entire community and not to crash their reputation or to just diminish any trust by going in totally kinetic on one area or one gang, right? So because how we show up there as a SWAT team, let's say, or a narcotics advice team, how we show up there is really, really important because those patrol officers have established a relationship in that neighborhood, right? So we go in there, we could ruin that just by the way that we're showing up attacking one specific problem. I don't know if that tracks with you or not.
It does. So how do you handle the communication gaps or communication challenges across those functional teams? Like, what does that look like? Is it a pre-mission briefing? Is it daily kind of line of sight into what's happening inside an area? Is it all of the above? What does communication look like across those teams?
Well, in my experience, it's different with every organization. And I got to tell you, most of the time it doesn't happen. Most of the time, the things that we're talking about don't get considered, which is too bad. I can tell you in my team, when we made our big shift that caused us to be wildly successful, we started thinking about the impact of our work on other people. We'd identify stakeholders, before we would engage in a mission, and then we'd involve them to the extent we could, because some of what we did was confidential. But we would pull members of that team, that broader team, in and have them actually operate with us. And that way we're including them, we're getting their perspective, they're sharing stuff with us, we're sharing stuff with them. We really saw ourselves as a tool for them, right? We were specially equipped to do things that they couldn't do at a surgical level. Again, they were more concerned with broader officer safety or broader community safety, I should say. And then here we were coming in with specialized tools and specialized tactics to be able to attack a specific problem. But yeah, it comes down to, to your point, you want to communicate and share what you can share. You want to involve the people that are impacted by your decisions in your decision-making process. And I can tell you that really benefited us a lot, because there's sometimes where we had an idea based on our intel of what a particular issue was or what aspects of a particular objective we should consider. Then you bring in the folks that are working there every day. And as you know, they've got a whole different knowledge set, right? So in my experience, it works best when you involve them up front. Although I can tell you, there are a lot of people not doing that. It's so easy to get head down in your own work, focus on your own objectives, and just be blind to the impact you're having. It's like a swimmer, right? Like, if you're head down in the pool and you're just, working as fast as you can to get across from one side to the other in your lane. Well, because you're head down, you can't see what the waves you're creating are doing to other swimmers, right? I mean, there's no way to know. And it's kind of that way sometimes with us at work. I mean, we're head down in our own stuff and we just can't see what kind of impact we're having on other people. So you got to get in front of that, in my experience.
Now, would you ever do any kind of like cross-team collaboration or team shadowing where someone might go on, let's say it's a mission, or they go on, I think about some of the cop movies. What's the Kevin Hart and Anchorman? I can't believe I can't remember his name.
Oh, Will Ferrell.
Will Ferrell. Is that Ride Along? Oh, no, that's not. Ride Along is Ice Cube and somebody else. But so would you have like a ride along? And in my space, what we do is you might have a job shadow where another member of the team joins a customer call, and their role may be simply to just be there to listen and maybe ask a couple of questions, not because we want them to lead the call or not because we need them to play a specific role. We just want to give them an opportunity to see what happens when the customer is actually communicating something. So would you do something similar, like ride-alongs or job shadowing or cross-team collaboration?
Yeah, we started to, again, the latter half of me leading that team, we started doing just that. We'd bring in folks from regular SWAT to come along with us. We'd involve them in the mission. And the purpose of that is twofold, by the way. You're building up credibility with them at the same time you're involving them. Because, I got this from Stanley McChrystal, actually. General McChrystal and Chris Fussell, if you read the book Team of Teams, they chronicle this in there pretty well. They had issues in the JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, of which General McChrystal was in charge of that entire command. And that's constituted by special forces groups from every branch of the military. They're in one command. And Chris, then being his aide de camp at the time, they realized they had these, let's say, these Navy SEALs who were the best of the best, right? These dev group guys. And then you had the Delta Force, let's say, in the Army, who were the best of the best at what they did, but they were constantly working at cross purposes, or they were confrontational with one another, right? Because our group's better than your group, So, McChrystal just mixed it up. He said, okay, you know what? SEALs, send a couple of your guys over here to work with Delta for a month or so, and Delta, send a couple of your guys over to work with the SEALs for a month or so. And what ends up happening is, right? I mean, if you're a Delta guy, you're the commander from Delta, and I'm the commander from, let's say, Dev Group, right? I'm still Team 6. Well, who are we going to send? We're going to send our best guys, right? We're going to send the cream of the crop because they're going to be representing us.
Sure.
So I get your best guys, you get my best guys. Now all of a sudden, we're looking around going, man, these guys actually, they're pretty good, right? And so it creates this camaraderie, and it breaks down some of those silos. So it's the same thing with us, right? I mean, you send, if I'm going to have one of my team members go out and, maybe attend a range day with the regular SWAT guys, right? Or maybe with some patrol guys, I'm going to send the best one I got. I want him representing us in the very best light. So you build credibility, you build trust. You also, when you share with people and you're open to being more transparent, it demystifies a lot of stuff too. They realize, hey, everybody's working hard. They're working hard. It's a win-win, in my opinion.
And I'm sure there's somebody out there, there's some people out there who would say, I'm not going to send my best guys, because the reason I'm not going to send my best guys is the negative impact it has on my set of my area of operation, the area that I'm focused on. So I'm going to send some people over there because I'm more concerned about what it's going to do to have on my area than I am on what we're actually going to learn. I would expect this is going to be the person who's thinking about that, maybe new into their role, a little bit less mature in the organization, probably under a lot of pressure to perform as a team. How do you help them shift the mindset there and say, no, you send your best, because the impact is going to be, 1, you want to demonstrate capability, 2, you want to build trust, and 3, in a lot of cases, your best people are going to do a really good job observing and learning. But how would you have that conversation with someone if they were a part of your organization and they said, look, Chip, I don't want to send my best people. I can't deal with them being out of the operation for a couple of days. What's your response?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're thinking long term here, and you've got to open up their mind to that idea, right? What we're doing here is we're making an investment. This is something that, it's going to cause us to sacrifice a little bit up front here. Maybe we don't have the person we'd like to have for a couple of days on this particular problem, but our return on investment is going to be huge down the road, because guess what? This isn't going to be the only problem we ever have to work together on, right? This is going to be a recurring theme. We're always going to have problems. The only people I know that don't have any problems are dead, right? I mean, if you're going to have problems and challenges. As a matter of fact, your life is constituted, whether at work or at home, by a series of problems that need to be solved. And so you have to help them see. That's part of a leader's job, I think, is to just help people see differently. Say, look what we're doing here. We're investing in this relationship. We're going to be able to leverage down the road. We got to do the hard work up front. What do we always say? The cost of your good habits are in the present. I mean, that's, the cost of your bad habits are in the future. Like if I want to sit here and eat a whole case of Snickers, no problem, right?
You could power through that.
I could power through that, no problem, right? But then the cost of that, it's coming down the road, right? I'm going to end up getting diabetes or gaining weight, or it's really going to hurt me in the long run. Whereas the cost of my good habits are in the present. I mean, I have to sacrifice now to get something that benefits me later. And that type of delayed gratification is pretty atypical for human beings. You have to train it, but it's the same thing, only at a strategic level. I have to get them to see, hey, look, this is the reason that we're doing this. This is what we're doing now. It's so that we can benefit the organization later. And these relationships, you just can't predict how impactful they will be down the road. So that's the first thing I would say.
Very good. So you talked a little bit about problem solving in there, and the fact that the only time where you don't have problems that you're either thinking about or worrying about or in the middle of is probably when you're on the other side of dirt. And then at that point, I don't know that you really have much to worry about then, because you're not around to worry about it. Can you describe your problem solving process? What happens? Like, so you run into a situation and everything is going nuts. It could be, heck, I talked about this on the podcast recently. I had water in our house that we didn't know about. So that was a problem that we became acutely aware of quickly. And I did not react very well to it. But let's talk about just problem solving in general. When a problem comes up, what are you thinking about and what do you do?
Well, it's funny. I'm thinking about your water analogy right now. It's like, you've really got two problems there. You've got the problem of the water that's there, and you got the problem of preventing more water from coming, right? I mean, so it's really the same thing, right? I mean, whatever problem we're dealing with in the immediate present is, you've got to also go back and deal with the symptoms. Like, how do I keep this from happening again? I mean, I've got to do kind of an analysis, what's a root cause analysis of this problem? So, we've got to stop the bleeding, but then we got to go back and figure out, hey, look, how did this happen in the first place? What do we need to do to prevent this from happening again? So really, there's two parts to it. So I think your water analogy is perfect, actually, right? I mean, get rid of the water, but then, hey, we got to make sure this doesn't happen again. There's a busted pipe somewhere. Something's causing this to occur.
Yeah, we got to figure it out. We got to figure it out pretty quick. And then once we figure that out, then we can once we've stopped the bleeding, so to speak, or stopped the water from leaking, then we can start to figure out how do we fix it from there. The other challenge we went into with this is we had people coming into town later that week. So now we're starting to think about, what else is this going to lead to? So how do you keep yourself focused on the problem at hand rather than allowing a lot of scope creep to happen where you're stuck trying to, getting spun around a bunch of other stuff? Do you have any process or practice that you use to help create that level of focus?
No, I mean, I think basically just before you go into it, you just have to get your mindset right around that idea. Is like, where am I going to get the most return on my investment for my focus right now? And again, you prioritize. I mean, you've got to say, look, there's going to be 4 or 5 things I need to address within the context of this problem. What's the most immediate thing I need to focus on, and then monotask on that thing? I think there's this myth out there, and myth's a bad word in a mythological sense. Myth doesn't mean what people think it means, but a misconception I would say out there, where we think we can manage numerous things at the same time. And I've never seen that done effectively. You spread yourself so thin, it can't happen. You're very limited as a human being, and you can focus really effectively on one thing at a time. So I'd say get your priorities straight right off the bat and think about what's going to cause me the most. It's easy to think, what's going to cause me the most harm? Like if you go out and with your water example again, if you start working on fixing the pipe before you shut the water off, right? I mean, so you're getting more and more water flooded into your area while you're up there trying to, how do we fix this leak? Or,
I've put my attention in the wrong place. If that's
what put your attention in the wrong place. And I mean, for me, it's just all about trying to prioritize up front. And I always like to invite people in who can look at it objectively. It's hard when it's your problem. It's hard to look at it objectively. It really is. I mean, we make a big deal out of things that happen to us. I was telling my wife this the other day. We were kind of talking, and we just bought her a brand new car. And we drove up to St. Louis, which is about 250 miles from here, picked her car up. We drove it back, and she had it for a day and a half, and somebody rear-ended her in the car wash.
Oh, no.
Like the car wash kind of locked it up.
Yep.
And so she got rear-ended, and it's $2,800, $3,000 worth of damage. I mean, now it's a Volvo. You look at it, you can't see the damage. I mean, like guys like you and me that grew up around station wagons, we think, oh, this thing's fine, right? But the body shop says differently. There's
sure.
like 57 computers in this thing. So yeah, it's like $3,000. But she was really, she's really brokenhearted about this. I mean, she's like, I had this car for a day and a half. And of course, I can say, honey, it's just a car. We'll get it fixed. It's no big deal, right? Why? Well, because I have perspective. It's not my car.
Right.
So I always think about, like, if you're having a problem, get somebody who can offer a different perspective, because you can get so close to the problem and so mired in it, right? I have my favorite glass that falls off my desk and breaks on the floor. And, I'm all figuratively shattered about that, right? But if you came up, you would say, hey, Chip, it's, the glass, you can get another one, Well, look, think about what someone else would say to you, right? Or think about what you would say to someone else if they were having the same problem, and then say that to yourself. It's really right? It's the same thing. It's no big deal. So, bringing people in, I think, that can bring a different perspective to it. That's why, and I know this is near and dear to your heart. That's why mentors are so important. People you can reach out to, a network, right? Like, hey, I can call you up. Hey, Mike, this is what I'm dealing with, buddy. Have you seen anything like that before? And of course you have, and you can help give me that perspective.
Yep. Yeah. Well, you don't have to go any further than you go into the eye doctor. And when an eye doctor puts the paddle, behind your head, there's a reason why you can't see it. It is a blind spot. The thing you have to do is shift perspective in order to see it. And that is I can either turn my head, or I can move my shoulders, or I can ask a couple of questions, or have somebody else ask a couple of questions, or get another point of view as we go through it. And blind spots are a thing, whether you're dealing with them physically in what you're looking at, or in the practices that we go through when we're in moments of high stress. And what I seem to find is, in moments of really high stress, those blind spots can get much bigger and risk can start to increase. And that becomes a time period where you've really got to be more deliberate about finding that space and finding that focus and getting some help from others. So in the context of mentoring, what do you think about when it comes to mentoring? When you think of so someone says mentoring, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I think about it as kind of like, it's analogous in my mind to coaching, right? It's different than training. I would make a distinction there, right? So for training, for me, I guess I can talk about mentoring by talking about what it's not first, right?
Sure.
So like a via negativa approach. So basically for me, training is you have a set curriculum and you're pretty tied to that. And you're going to share that curriculum as a base foundation with everybody at the same level. I may address different learning modalities, but look, if we're teaching a framework, let's say, I'm going to teach that framework the same way to everybody.
Yep.
Whereas with mentoring, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to customize that knowledge a bit, right? I'm actually going to blend what you already know and tie that into what I'm trying to teach you. And I'm going to do it a lot through modeling, and I'm going to do it a lot through allegory. We're going to talk about things, abstract things, hypothetical things, and we're going to find a way to apply it to problems that you're having, make it relative to you. So mentoring to me, whereas with training, I might be talking at you in a way and presenting information to you. Mentoring, we're partnering together. We're actually partnering together on this journey, right? I'm your battle buddy on this journey, and I'm helping you, guiding you through this knowledge maze, if you will. So that's kind of how I think about it. When you ask me to distinguish, right, between mentoring and training, coaching, I think, again, hand in hand with mentoring in a way. I think the coaching maybe applies even more of a seasoned person on the other end of that relationship. Like, so if I'm coming to you, like, for instance, I'm a novice in business, you could fill up a thimble with what I know about your world, but you know a lot about that world. So if I come to you, we could collegially engage in this relationship, but you would be bringing much more to the table than I would be bringing. Whereas a mentoring relationship, sometimes it's like we're learning from each other, but sometimes I've been in this role for a while. I have a lot of technical knowledge, but what you're doing is you're helping polish me up a little bit, sand off the rough edges. So I don't know. That's probably overthinking it.
No, I think it's pretty good. One of the ways I like to look at this is, when it comes to coaching as an example, which is one of the pieces you brought up there. A coach is going to see things that you aren't necessarily going to be able to see in yourself. And I believe that coaching is one-on-one. I don't think that you can coach multiple people at the same time. Now, granted, I understand in the context of football, we can coach a team and we can coach position roles, or we can be position coaches and we can communicate things broadly. But when it comes to things like foot position or hand position or being able just to create a little bit more leverage, there's something that coach is going to be able to see that you won't be able to see while you're in the moment, either because you don't understand body position or you've got a blind spot going on, or you just have kind of gotten yourself into this habit because you're young in the force. You've only got 12 years. You've not gone through the level of skepticism and cynicism that you've run into and then come out the other side saying, hey, you know what? Are we really doing this the right way? And then once you've got that experience, you start to get the broader experience, then you can kind of come back and give back through some coaching because you can see the technical pieces. I do think it's interesting how people will sometimes use those three words synonymously. And it does the person on the other end a bit of a disservice. Like, I know that if we're training, if we are working on getting everybody's mindset around, we're going to bring in a trainer who's going to deliver a specific piece of information. Our expectation should be, I'm going to get some information. I'm going to be asked to do some things, maybe put it into practice or demonstrate that I have a level of awareness that's different than what I had just coming into it. And then I really liked how you described the mentor relationship, because there's going to be a lot of back and forth there. And there's going to be a lot of ebb and flow and kind of discussion. In a lot of cases, no, when I have an opportunity to mentor or be a mentor with folks, I learn so much from them. One, just through the questions that they're asking and the things that they're thinking about, because there are a lot of things that people will be thinking about in a given role that I really haven't had to think about in a while, because I've just, I'm in the, how'd you describe it? The only thing I'm doing is wearing the uniform that makes it look like I'm part of this thing, not that I'm actually in it, doing it from a day-to-day space. So I think it's a very important thing to do as we all get experience and get a little bit older and find opportunities to give back, to identify areas where you can be a mentor. And what you'll find is you'll probably learn more from that person you're mentoring than they might take away from that experience. At least at a minimum, you get to test a bunch of things. What do you think?
Oh, no, I think 100%. Matter of fact, well, when you talk, I like what you're saying. Like when you're riffing on that, training, coaching, mentoring, like training, you're teaching me how to do something, right? It's a process thing. But when you're mentoring, when you're coaching me, you're teaching me how to show up while I'm doing that. Like you're talking about, how am I perceiving the situation? What's my mindset? I mean, it's basically the artistic part of it, right? It's not like, the training part's the procedural part. That's just like, these are the things, this is the minimum. We got to hit this. But you can build trust. You can build all kinds of positive attributes into what you're doing by how you're showing up in what you're doing. And so that coach or that mentor is providing that context for you in a way. I like it. I just like what you were saying about it. I thought it was cool. And you talk about learning as much as the mentee. I spent 4 years on a tactical timeout. I spent 4 years teaching at the academy, and I was teaching defensive tactics, which in the police world is everything from handcuffing to ground fighting, throws, how to work the people would call a nightstick colloquially, all that stuff. I did that for 4 years, and I'm telling you, if you really want to learn something, teach. Because, it will open you up in ways that you couldn't even imagine. Just that perspective shift that you get, right? I learned that there and I never forgot it. I always thought, well, if I really want someone to become an expert at something, help them teach it, make them a teacher. And it takes on a whole new level. It just accelerates that learning so much. So that really hits home with me. To this day, I still think about that experience, and I've leveraged it and used it. Just my ability to explain things from different perspectives, because I've been challenged by so many different types of students. There are people that picked up things quick. There were people who, honestly, it was like they had two left feet, and those people taught me how to teach them. So again, I like that reciprocity you hinted at there.
Well, and so when you go through this kind of teaching component and you start looking at it, you're teaching a group of folks, anything. Let's say it's on the tactics side of things. What does that process look like? And meaning, is it a conveying information and then putting it into practice, and then conveying some more information and then having them put it into practice, and then having them teach? Like, how would you integrate that into, let's say, a classroom environment where you're getting ready to focus on some specific tactics? Can you share an example of what that might look like?
Yeah, I mean, so like the first thing you're going to do is you're going to teach the abstract part of it, right? The theoretical part of it. I'm going to sit down and we're going to walk through, like, what does it mean? Like, let's say I'm teaching room clearing. Okay, what is a sight line, right? I'm going to teach you terminology. What is a hotspot? What is the difference between a button hook and a cross? I'm going to give you those definitions. We're going to walk through that on the whiteboard. We're going to talk about it, discuss the reasons behind it. What's the theory? What's the purpose behind the practice, right? We're going to get that technical knowledge nailed down. Then we're going to literally walk through it by starting with static training. We're going to position people physically in these positions and then reinforce the theoretical stuff we talked about. Like, we remember in the classroom when we talked about a button hook. Okay, this is what that looks like physically. We walk you through it. Here's why you would do that in this scenario. In this, let's say you're going to enter a center fed room, right? This is why you would do that in that scenario. And so walk them through it, and then add a little bit more context, and then gradually ramp up the speed, and then gradually introduce new variables. And you just kind of build them up. So you just take them from basically no stress, and you gradually introduce stress into the system until you can get them operating in an environment that's as close to what the real environment's going to be like as possible. You just rehearse. So like, if I think about sales, let's say, just taking it out of the tactical space, I think it's probably true, and you could disagree with me on this and with some authority, but I think it's probably true that good salespeople are probably made more than born. Like, I think there's probably some things that you would need to know as a salesperson to really make you effective. I mean, you may have a great personality, but you've also got some substance there. And
are we still talking about me, or are we talking about somebody else?
Well, this hypothetical person that would.
Perfect. Thank you.
But my point is, like, if you were going to train me to be a salesman, like, you could give me all the technical stuff, and you could give me some books to read, and I could go through them and learn some jargon and learn principles. But then at the end of the day, we might role play. You might say, okay, Chip, sell this to me, and then you can give me tips and advice and coach me through it. It's the same, right? I mean, you can use all these tactics, from role playing to, static training, dynamic training, kinetic, not kinetic. And you're eventually building me up and growing me in the right direction. I mean, am I off base with the sales thing at all?
You were completely on point. But the mistake that a lot of leaders make, and a lot of people in general make, is they think, I can just go and train people, and I can just go ahead and just deliver the training. We're going to go deliver the information. Then we're going to let people run with it, rather than go through the process of creating opportunities for them to put it into practice. And then immediately following that with some coaching. I mean, when we go through, even in the hiring process, when I hire sales reps, when I hire, I would say pretty much any role on my team, I'm going to provide a scenario for them to go through that doesn't require a lot of product knowledge relative to the products that we deliver into the marketplace, but does require some technical capability, an ability to demonstrate that they know how to do some of the work. And then after that interview, I leave 15 minutes to provide some coaching. And the coaching does a couple of things. One, I want to see how they respond to the coaching. Do they get a little defensive when I'm asking some questions, or do they assess themselves well on what they could have done better in the call, or what they could have done worse? Everybody's got nerves. Things are happening. People are going through an interview process. Their intensity is up pretty high because they're probably excited about joining the organization. So we've got all of these things that are all of these outside scenarios that could impact how people perform. What I want to figure out is, are they able to assess the situation? How do they take feedback? What kind of feedback do they have based on that? And how do they perform in the general scenario? And I'm just taking all those pieces as data points. At a minimum, even if we don't hire that person, I want them to leave with the experience of they've gotten some direct feedback from someone who's done this before that could help them the next time they go through that scenario. And I think it's critical. It's a critical part of our process when we're hiring. It's a part of the process I need to do a better job with when training inside our own team, just because I'll go in and I'll do all of these things with external people. And one of the sales director inside our organization, he came back after one of the interviews he was on. He said, I think our team really could benefit from going through these scenarios too. And you kind of like blinding flash of the obvious. Wow. How were we missing this? Why were we not taking advantage of this time? And I can tell you why we weren't taking advantage of it, or why we don't take advantage of it, and why we need to change that. We get so caught up in the day-to-day type things that are pushing the operation forward that we forget about taking the time to develop ourselves directly. But Chip, you hit it out of the park there. That's the process. Yeah.
Well, it's like you're too busy driving to stop and get gas, right? Sometimes, I mean, and just you made this distinction there a moment ago. It's an important distinction I don't think people should miss. I'm going to draw it out. There's a difference between knowledge and understanding. And, you can have technical knowledge about something. That doesn't mean you understand it. I mean, you take me, for instance, I can talk about anatomy, right? I can talk about, I can like look at your neck. I could say, okay, well, I know there's 7 cervical vertebrae. I know the thoracic artery. If you travel, the common carotid arises out of the thoracic artery, travels up the side of your neck and bifurcates opposite the 4 cervical vertebrae and the thyroid cartilage to become the internal and external carotid. And I can just whip this off to you, right, from my basic knowledge of anatomy, but you don't want me operating on your neck.
I do not. At least I don't think so.
No, you do not, right? I mean, so the idea is like, if you were to show me an exploded drawing of the neck and say, okay, Chip, what needs to happen here with this plaque and this artery? I don't have any idea. You would need a surgeon who was trained and skilled in that area. Just because I understand how the anatomy works, that does not mean that I'm the guy or I should say I have the knowledge of how the anatomy works, that I understand the implications of all that. So I don't know if that's a good analogy or not. It just popped in my head, but
I think it's an awesome analogy. And then imagine what happens in the scenario where, spoiler alert, neither Chip nor I are doctors. At least Chip, I don't think you're a doctor. Are you a doctor?
I'm not a doctor, actually. I am not even close to a doctor.
Okay. With the description.
I almost said something funny, but
I figured it was pretty close. But so neither of us are doctors. Well, someone could have the technical expertise to describe whatever these things are. Well, then put them into a situation where things are falling all over the place, or heart rate stops, or any other thing that creates stress. How well do they handle that stress? And as Chip was talking through the scenarios that he would train on, and we talk about button hooks and cross, and I don't know if he's talking about football or he's talking about going into a room, but if now all of a sudden it's dark in the room and there are loud noises around there, and what does that do and now my heart rate is through the roof and I'm breathing too heavy. How does that change how quickly I respond to things? And how are we empowering our teams, whether they're teams that we lead inside organization, or they're the teams we support in the companies that we're delivering solutions to? How are we supporting those teams in that high stress environment where now they've got to put this into practice in a scenario where, like, let's use a common sales scenario. Let's say that you expect one person to be in the room and now they bring in 2 senior executives from the same organization into the room, or just by happenstance, CEO of your company says, hey, I've got some time. I know you're getting ready to talk to this organization. I'd like to sit in on that call with you. And now your early career sales professional going on a discovery call, and now the CEO of your company is sitting in the room, your nerves are going to go up a little bit. So how are we creating those environments where people can operate and think critically and think differently under stress? We can create those scenarios for folks. And I think the more opportunity you give your team to perform in those scenarios, the better they'll get when they have to perform in those scenarios. Yeah,
no, I agree. I think it's critical. I mean, the same mechanisms are at play in both those contexts, by the way, whether it's a SWOT context or a sales context. I mean, we have one autonomic nervous system. That's the only one we have. And it is evolutionarily equipped to deal with like tigers jumping out of bushes. It's not evolved, right, for these contemporary threats. And so, when I'm making an entry on a hot room and, shots are fired, or you walk into that sales room and you're thinking you're doing A, and all of a sudden here comes these 2, execs, or you get called into your office to meet your boss and you don't know why. I mean, the things that start happening in your body, it's the difference is only in degree. I mean, they're the same things. And as soon as your heart rate starts going up and you start, losing the ability, all the blood rushes from that neocortex into those muscles, that the fight, flight, freeze, submit, or posture, the muscles you use for those things, your ability to think goes out the window. So what you're doing in that scenario when you're coaching and mentoring and putting them in that context is you're training them to be comfortable and to be familiar with that type of stimulus. And then they can operate a lot better in it. It's like, oh, I've been here before. And, you can forecast how you're going to behave because you've done it. You've been there before. So you get surprised by these extra 2 guests, and guess what? No problem. You just roll with it. It's the same thing. I saw it in SWAT. I mean, we bring a new person in, and you could predict it, how wide-eyed they would be, and they'd be so channeled and focused on one thing, and they couldn't shift. They couldn't transition because they were so stressed out. And, their heart rate would be going through the roof, and you could see them lose the ability to manipulate fine motor skills, like things that would normally they would have to do within the context of the job, they just couldn't physically do. But then the more you expose them to that stimulus, and the more they've got conditioned for it, the better they got. It got to the point where I've been in a couple scenarios where shots are being fired and we're having a conversation like you and I are having about, I don't really think that guy can hit us. He doesn't have the right angle, and, he's barricaded behind the safe, but, he's got a foot sticking out. Can someone hit his foot? And, you're having this conversation and you kind of think back on it and you're thinking, my God, we were getting shot at, this is kind of a big deal. And so, and I'm not saying that to make us sound really super cool. It's just familiarity breeds that comfort. The more you're in those type of situations, the more you become comfortable with them. Now you take me in, put me in a different context. You put me on the side of a mountain, doing a free climb. And dude, I'm going to try to become part of that rock. I'm going to be sucking the opposite of what I should be doing, right? I'm going to try to suck into the side of the rock, which for you potential rock climbers out there, don't do that. But I mean, that's what I'm going to want to do because I'm totally out of my element. And so, no, I think it's really important that you gradually increase the stressors in a controlled environment where you can control the outcome. So like I said, I love the role playing thing. I'll do that a lot of times, Mike, one of my specialties is dealing with misconduct, dealing with employees that have, broken the rules, let's say, all from minor stuff all the way up to terminating people. I've made it my business to become really expert in that space. I think firing people is something you should be really good at, but you should never enjoy. And it's a skill set. And so a lot of times I'll have supervisors come to me and say, hey, I've got to have this conversation with Mike and I'm going to have to give him some discipline. I'm kind of nervous about it. So first off, I know they're going to succeed because they're honest about their vulnerability, right? They're telling the truth. Right. Nobody loves those situations. And so great, let's just role play it. I'll be Mike and you be you, and let's walk through this thing. And we can add in degrees of difficulty, right? I could throw some emotion back at them that they're not expecting, or, I could maybe cry a little bit, or I could get angry or whatever it is, but you coach them through that, to use your words. And then when they go sit down with Mike in real time, they've been there before. So, right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the thing we've got to remember is people haven't been there before until they've been there before. So too often we get into this mode of, look, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to train the specifics of whether it's the tool or it's the approach or it's the thinking. But, you create these experiences for others. And I can tell you, I still fail at this. I've been in scenarios where I either didn't prepare properly for a call, or I get too amped up going into the conversation, and then I miss on questions that I would have asked in a scenario where if I go back in and kind of reflect on things and say, how could I have done this better? Yeah, you can always get better, and you're going to continue to make mistakes. Be comfortable with the idea that you're going to make mistakes. And, fortunately in the career that I've chosen, those mistakes aren't life or death type things, but my ego might be bruised, or I might get down on myself. But, no matter how much you prepare or how much you train, you're still going to make some mistakes. Just be comfortable with the idea of you make a mistake and you learn from it and then you move forward.
Yeah. I mean, some mistakes you only get to make once, unfortunately, but to your point, it's process, right? I mean, you have to focus on the process. You really don't control the outcome, and you focus on the process as much as you can, and you refine where you can. And I will tell you, I ran between 2,500 and 3,000 tactical operations during my career, which is more than most people ever meet, for sure. And I was just telling this to a young captain I was talking with today. Her and I were talking about this very topic. And I said, look, we're talking about vulnerability and, this idea that, you're never going to perfect it. You have an ideal and you shoot for that ideal. I'm aiming for the ideal. In those missions, in 2,500 to 3,000 missions, we never ran a perfect one. And when I told her that, she goes, "Oh, how can that be?" I go, "Well, look, think about everything that goes into running what would constitute a perfect mission, from stepping in the right place to moving at the right cadence to taking a pause and a beat at the right time. The difference between the timing between the 2-man and the 3-man going in a room. There's an art to that. But there are certain things you want to try to accomplish and you never hit it perfectly. Now things turn out okay, and it gives you the illusion that your process was perfect. But that's not it, right? There's so many variables affecting that outcome that are outside of your control. You have to humble yourself to that, and you prepare for what you can prepare for. And then you just acknowledge that there's going to be things that aren't going to go well. And when they don't, you're not caught flat-footed. You're not, mired down in your own mind, being so disappointed that you're immobilized. You can say, okay, boo. Okay, that didn't come out the way I wanted it to. How do I recover? Right? And so you just recover and you reset. I was telling somebody this the other day. I said, if you're in the middle of a conversation with someone, a high stress conversation, and you say something and you don't like the way it sounds, just stop. Say, you know what? That's really not the right words for the things I'm trying to say. Let me back up here. Let's rewind the tape. I'd like taking the crack at that. I go, and you think they're going to hold that against you? They won't. They won't at all hold that against you. That's a big part of why it's funny. Tanner and I, if you listen to our podcast, which I know you do, we don't edit a lot. I'll say some really stupid things, or, sometimes I'll say something where I'm thinking, listening back to them, like, why did I say that? But we want it to be genuine. We want people to see, hey, we're just throwing ourselves out there. We're just like you. We're engaged in these conversations, these talks. We're making mistakes. No problem. We're going to roll with it. We're going to figure it out and see what comes out the other side. I think you're better for the struggle, in my opinion. I think you're better for it.
Yeah. And embrace it. Just like you were going through. If you're talking through something and it's not landing or it's not coming out the way that you intended, one option is to just keep digging and keep going and going and going and really confuse the situation. The other one is to stop, assess, and give it another shot. And I can tell you some of the best relationships I've built with clients over the years have been when I've made a mistake and then I've owned up on the mistake. I've blind copied or responded to teams of people where there were others where it wasn't intended to get it out to all of those folks. Yeah. And then you own up to the mistake, and just people know that mistakes happen. People know that you're not going to deliver something in the perfect manner. I really like how you describe that vulnerability. Go ahead.
No, vulnerability is the key. I got to ask you a question. You mentioned blind copying. Have you ever blind copied somebody that didn't understand what a blind copy was? So you blind copied them and they reply back to all. Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, it has happened to me. And in the instance where I did this, it wasn't that I blind copy. It wasn't a blind copy. I mistook or I misstated that. It was that I replied to all, and we had a client on the email thread, client's team on the email thread, along with our internal team. And what I was sharing were my internal notes with the team, just basically assessing the meeting that we had, making some recommendations around next steps, talking about where we missed on some things and where the client had missed on some things. And my notes are pretty detailed. And on the positive side, the client on the other side got to see what I was really thinking about, where they could have improved, but also where we could have improved. And ultimately the relationship was better for it.
You can see where that mistake can be made. That's why I'm very careful when I write things down, or even when I say things. I just assume anything I say to you, I'm assume it's being recorded, right? I mean, by the way, is this being recorded?
This is being recorded. Even
okay.
That's I didn't think about that with the stuff I have on my whiteboard. Now it looks like hieroglyphics. Now we don't show video, but that is what
I can see your whiteboard. I was like, that's an impressive whiteboard, by the way. Yeah, I can see I can diagnose you based on that whiteboard. That's pretty impressive.
So now I've been diagnosed not only by the whiteboard, by penmanship, but where veins pop out of my neck.
Yes, I think it's a good practice for budding leaders that are listening to. A good practice is, it's good to have people you can trust with your emotions and your vulnerabilities for sure. But I mean, don't write things down or say things about folks that you really wouldn't say in front of them. I mean, you always want to defend those who aren't present. You want to be careful with that. And I know I probably took us a little bit off topic, but when you said blind copy, it brings back so many memories of, back when we were all new to email. And, occasionally I'll blind copy somebody on something. Not that I'm disparaging anyone, but I want them to know the information because maybe they're a confidant, but I don't want the other person to know I'm sharing this with somebody at the time. And then they reply back to all. And it's kind of like, yeah, just like you're saying, Chip. I'm thinking, well, got started. I wasn't ready to bring you in yet. So,
well, it is. I mean, we want to deliver some kind of situational awareness to folks and get the information out there. But
it's so easy. It's so easy to do it, right? It's I trust you. I know you. I know what you're about. I know your intellect. Rather than having to retell this whole story, I'm just going to copy on my response and then, get with me offline. No, that's a fail. You got to make sure the other person understands. So I just quit doing it. Occasionally my wife will blind copy me on something or I'll blind copy her. We know the rules. But, I'm afraid if you blind copy me, Mike, I'm afraid to reply to you. Yeah, I'm afraid I'll hit the wrong button. I'll call you on the phone. Hey, dude, saw that blind copy. Yeah, I think you're right on point. So anyway, I digressed.
Well, and you got to think about it too. What's the blind copy for? Now, the blind copy, again, we're going off on a huge tangent, but the blind copy serves a purpose. One, you want to protect the email addresses of all the other people that were on there. So it's about conveying information out, not expecting the people are going to respond to it. But when somebody does respond back to it, ideally the only people that are on there are the person who sent the message. But if you're surprising somebody with a blind copy and you're doing this for any other reason, you really got to check yourself. On the other side, the other thing I'm thinking about whenever I get blind copied on stuff, thinking, man, how much of the stuff that they send to me is being blind copied to somebody else?
No, you're right. You're right. Well, so one way I used it, and again, we probably need to put a point on this conversation. People listen about blind copy, but one way I used it was like with Jack Colwell, my co-author. He's kind of a mentor to me in a lot of ways. I mean, totally different perspective. And a lot of times, a lot of emails I would send, I would blind copy him on for him to be able to kind of coach me a little bit. Like, okay, did I handle this situation in the right way, Jack? Did I respond to this person the way, what are you seeing? I'm not seeing. And of course, he's always really good about it. But without even thinking about it, without even thinking about what the other person might think, right? I wasn't even thinking like, well, gosh, what would they think if they knew I was sharing this with somebody they don't know?
Right. So
it's really a little ethical issue that you don't think about. So I think we've pretty much run we've
run the gamut of business email and communication and all of that other kind of stuff. So we've covered a lot of range on this podcast. Chip, you've got a podcast, Changing Discourse. Where can people find your podcast?
Well, I will say this in my radio voice. You can find it at Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and anywhere you find podcasts.
We will include links in the show notes to the Changing Discourse podcast. You also have an event coming up in August. You want to share some information with folks about the event in August? I know there's a limited number of seats available to it. By the time this goes live, there may not be seats available anymore, but let's just talk a little bit about the event, where people can go to find out about the event. And I'm sure if this event sells out, there'll probably be another one sometime in the future. But can you talk a bit about the event that's coming up in August?
Yeah. So Tanner and I are hosting a Changing Discourse Red Teaming event in Kansas City, August 20th and 21st of this year. It's our first live event. And, we're basically going to be introducing the concept of red teaming, the red teaming methodology to participants. And we are keeping it small, as you mentioned. I mean, I think we put maybe 15 tickets out there. I mean, this is going to be a customized event for people that really want to dive deeper into this methodology. We're going to have Colonel Kevin Benson, who actually co-founded the school at Fort Leavenworth that taught red teaming to the military. And for those of you listening that don't know what red teaming is, it's basically predicated on this idea that as human beings, we are intuitive decision makers. That's just how we make decisions. We have this illusion that we're thinking things through in a rational way, but it's just that. It's an illusion. And the only way to compensate for that is to be able to engage with people who have different perspectives and are willing to be contrarian in the way they're thinking about your plan. So if Mike and I are putting together a plan, we want to put it through the red teaming process. We want to battle harden that plan. I kind of equate it to kind of a hydrostatic test, right? We're going to infuse your plan with critical thinking and logic. And that infusion is going to expose weak spots. What am I missing? What am I not seeing? The blind spots that you mentioned, Mike, up top, right? We're looking to use this process to expose them before we launch the plan. That's the big key here, right? You and I talked about doing after action reviews and looking back. Well, we're looking prospectively at, we're going to launch this plan. If it's going to go wrong, how's it going to go wrong? And let's account for that up front. So that's what red teaming is about. And if any of the listeners want to Google red teaming, you could learn, a lot more. But we're hoping to share these some techniques from this red teaming quiver, if you will, with our attendees. And because we're keeping it small, we can do a lot of one-on-one stuff. A lot of the where I find, I'm sitting in a room with 300 people and I'm being lectured to, that's a totally different experience than partnering with someone in a learning experience. We're facilitating this learning. So that's a lot, isn't it?
That is a lot. And to translate some of the words for some folks, and you mentioned after action reviews or these AARs, that would be more like a postmortem that we would do at the end of a project or at the end of a program launch or at the end of a deal. And the red teaming approach would be something similar to a pre-mortem, where we go through the process of kind of figuring out, hey, where can this fail? What are we not thinking about? How do we provide better line of sight to the discussion, get that additional perspective, and really kind of get comfortable with things that you may not be comfortable with. Chip, I really appreciate the time. Thanks for joining the podcast. I will include show notes or links in the show notes for everybody to go to both the event. This is going to drive Jen nuts, but maybe we'll include a search on red teaming, and we'll get a link to the Changing Discourse podcast. If you know of someone who would benefit from this conversation, please share it. Please share it via LinkedIn or Twitter. Tag both Chip and I in that share so that we know where it came from. Sales is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?